This is a tasty burger. Yo, what's up guys? Welcome to another Shamshir Sound video. My name is Ali Nadem, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about reverb. I want to talk about the decay with reverb. I want to talk about when you should use longer reverbs, when you should use shorter reverbs, the difference between all the reverbs. Is there one that is the best? Is there the one that's the worst? What's the difference between them all? And how can you make reverb and use reverb to create more depth in your mix, to create more dimension, to fill more frequencies, and to create the concept of more in-your-face sounds and more stuff distant in the mix? So let's talk about that right now. We have a simple lead. I kind of made something quick right before this. It might not be completely correct. It's from that track Mammoth, I believe. I made like my own idea of it. I was just humming it. So let's just play this back, and let's put the dry wet kind of a bit lower there, so get an idea of what we have so far. So we just have some simple lead with a little bit of reverb on there. Now, of course, when we work with reverb, we have the couple things we want to focus on. We have the dry wet, of course, which when it's completely dry, it's completely in your face. Which you've never really heard a track where a guy's playing a super dry element. There's usually always a bit of wetness to it, because if it's too dry, it just sounds weird. It sounds like it's not in a room. When I'm talking to you guys right now, I'm in a room and there is some reverb in this room. And though I try to reduce it with applying foam and the blanket behind me, there's a blanket, couple blankets behind me. The closet here has tons of clothes which will absorb it. Room acoustics, think about it. A reverb is essentially, when you hear a reverb, it's simulating a room. So when we crank up this dry wet, it's as if we're in a big hall, almost like a cathedral. And when we reduce that size, now it almost sounds like what? What does that sound like? It sounds like we're in a small box environment. How small can we get? All right, so that's super small. Let's go somewhere in the middle. That reminds me of like a garage. Kind of reminds me of, like, I remember my friend back in the day in this one city, we did like a little DJ event in this like garage, industrial garage, and that's what that reminds me of. Let's crank it up. And as we start to get bigger, it starts to become like a bigger room. And if we go crazy, that is like Grand Canyon, and it's superficial, right? So the way you dictate your decay or size, it's called different things depending on the type of reverb you're using. That simulates the room, and pay a lot of attention to that. The room size that you choose is going to determine what you're doing with that sound. Now, of course, we're not going to get into sidechain reverb, because you could make a huge reverb and make it so that it's dry, but then, you know, like not super dry, but like it's kind of like at a value like this, and then it keeps going up when the lead's not playing. In like in a lot of the big room tracks, you know, it's like dut dut whoa dut 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 whoa. The reverb gets huge, but then returns back when the note is playing. The notes are sidechaining it. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to be talking about how and why you choose that size, that decay. So when you want to choose a size, right? So let's say I like this size. All right. So this is my mindset. Let me explain my mindset. So I'm going to crank up the dry wet. So with my mindset, I go with what's appropriate for the vibe. So I bring up the dry wet, I listen to the size, and I'm like, is the size too small? Because I don't like this for the lead. Like, what the hell is that, right? But too huge is too much. It's going to create probably some muddiness, especially if the lead is pretty loud in the track. I liked it around here for this scenario. It's always different. Sometimes I like it a bit smaller. Sometimes I like it a bit larger. And I like it around here. Why? Because it sounds like it's like a big room size. It's not too small. Let's listen to it. Now, of course, I'm going to choose my dry wet. So let's see. Let me see where I like my dry wet. We could leave it there. It's around 20. It's 18. Now, massive here is not showing me extra controls. So what do I mean by extra controls? You also want to be careful with what you do with your EQ, because if you have too much reverbs going on in your track, you're going to have a lot of muddiness. What is muddiness? Muddiness is kind of like a concept for too much frequencies going on, or a really disturbance in the force, you know, like Star Wars, disturbance in the force.
He is to be trained then? No.
He will not be trained. No. He is too old.
In that low mid region, because reverb, you're introducing new frequencies. So be careful, process your lead accordingly. And what I would do with this, if this was like a lead with a big room kick, I would probably slap on a Pro Q and I would do something like a low cut, maybe anywhere around 120 or 150 hertz to eliminate some of that low end, not only from the lead, but also from the reverb. So let's throw on a reverb. I'm going to use the Fruity reverb, a really nice one. And let's close up the lead. And I'm going to talk about now we have an idea. We know, okay, size, you know, because the size, it always depends on the scenario. Remember what I talked about the room you want to simulate. And when I do percussion, sometimes when I have like a snare drum or I have a kick, try to do like different decays. Don't put everything the same decay. If you have a lead that is grand and like this one, nice big sound. Let's play that back again. Turn off the reverb. Right? It wouldn't make sense to put a snare drum. You don't want that. But if the snare drum is really dry, you could introduce something like this. Let me just throw in some percussion. All right, so I threw in a quick sample from Ollie James. And listen to the snare drum. It's really dry. It's literally like completely dry. So yeah, it's in your face, but a little bit of wetness could create more dimension. And remember, it's about dimension. It's about giving depth to your track. And reverb, always try to use it conservatively. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go ham with it. There are, and I'm going to talk about near the end of the video, some ideas where you can put huge amounts of reverb and back down the volume and put it lower in the mix. We'll get into that. The snare drum here is very dry. Let's play it with the kick. So the snare drum, what I would recommend is putting on something like a Fruity reverb. And we'll talk about the types of reverbs and which ones I recommend. So we have 100% dryness. Let's listen again and introduce, let's simulate what we did with the lead and why we wouldn't want to do that. That we don't want like a huge decay on the reverb. It's going to take away from the lead. It's going to add muddiness. It's going to be just too clustered. However, watch what happens with a shorter decay. Even something like this where you go like 0.2, 0.3, 1, it's almost unrecognizable. Let's see if the average listener would even tell if this was there, if we introduce a bit of wetness to this snare drum. Even there, I can hear it at 2%, but it's so subtle. That is creating depth. So you guys see the difference between using a short decay for, I recommend for percussive elements. Now, not the kick. Don't put a reverb on your kick. But for percussive elements like a tom, a snare drum, maybe even hats or rides, like your cymbals, can do a lot to create a little bit of extra spice. But the novice is going to do this. Right? And that's unfitting, because when you have it at a low value, again, all those small micro details add up. So that really hits it hard for me, showing you guys that. And the nice thing about here is I would recommend doing a little bit of a low cut, or you could leave it untouched and maybe throw an EQ after the fact. Maybe you could put an EQ right after and do something similar. You could maybe just say, you know what, I'm going to do a low cut. Some people like to EQ after the reverb. Some people like to EQ before the reverb. Sometimes I like to do both. I would probably personally do it before and maybe also keep an eye on it wherever I want. Always listen to it. Trust your ears, your best asset. So we talked about the room. We talked about the size. We talked about percussive reverb. How do you put stuff deeper into the mix? How can I put in elements deeper into the mix to create a mountain, right? We always want to think about a mountain. So I'm going to put in, I'm going to make like an effect sound, okay? And I'm going to put on and slap on a ton of reverb onto it. Make it easier. Let's just do it to the lead. So let's pretend like this is not a lead. Instead, it's just this weird patty thing playing in the background. I'm just going to pull the wetness all the way up and watch what happens. Let's play this with the kick, and we will sidechain it. You see, it has so much reverb on it, but because the volume is so low, you can put things deeper into the mix using lower volume. And what I mean deeper in the mix is it's like behind the listener, like it's distant from them. It's not in their face. The kick is in your face right now. The snare drum's in your face right now, but you can put a lot of reverb and combine that with reducing the volume, because this wouldn't sound good. You wouldn't want that. But if we did this, we could almost turn this into a pad. Let's just play one note. So you can do all different types of tricks where you could make the reverb very big, but you want to eliminate the risk of clustering your mix by just reducing the volume. Again, EQ it accordingly. Like I would probably cut out some low end again. I always cut out low end on most of my tracks. And let's talk about the types of reverb. So, you know, there's Fruity Reverb 2, there's Fruity Reverb, there's Valhalla Room, there's Valhalla Vintage Verb, there's Valhalla Plate, there's Isotope Nectar Reverb, there's all different types of reverbs. Now, is there a best one? Simply put, there is no best. It's all subjectivity. It's all relative to what you're working on. Me personally, I really love the reverb inside of Massive. When I'm designing a lead, I rarely source my reverb to something else. Sometimes you can use a reverb on top of it. So if this was your lead and you want to add more reverbs after it, by all means, be my guest. There's no rules. Smash and crush and bend and break those rules. And a lot of times I like using simplicity. I like the simplicity of Fruity Reverb. I like that it has a dry and a wet knob, so I can keep 100% dryness, but then I can dictate how much I have rather than this here having a dry wet where I lose some of my dry signal. So again, it just has to do with what works for you. I have used a whole array of reverbs, but my favorite reverbs are going to be the Massive Reverb, the Fruity Reverb, the reverb in Serum designed by Tal is also very good. Fruity Reverb 2 is also very good. Cat is scratching the door. Say hello. So there's not really like the best reverb. Use the reverb that gives you the best workflow, but always remember these key things. You can create more depth by using volume, and when you use a lot of reverb, it makes it distant. It's a Grand Canyon. It's distant. It's not a room. It's no longer a garage or a hall or a cathedral. It's now a Grand Canyon. So reduce that volume and it's a Grand Canyon in the background. That could work as an effect, a pad, okay? We learned about the size, you know, the decay / size will dictate how big that space is. Is it a garage? Is it a cathedral? And it all depends on what you want to do with the sound. There's never a time where I'm always using a specific decay, but I have my favorites. When I'm making a lead in Massive, I usually stay in this range of like the 50 to like 70 range. But again, you just have to listen to your ears, find that sweet spot. Remember that reverb can cluster and get really dirty if you have tons of it going on. So make sure you EQ it. Make sure you EQ your lead and you remove that low end. On top of that, the last thing that I want to say is really less is more. use it conservatively and go from like 0 and work your way into it and find that sweet spot. And really that's a key element when it comes to reverb. The masters, the professionals use reverb such that it is adding a final touch, a little spice. And we can definitely hear that with that snare drum there. Like we saw, the snare drum has that fruity reverb with a decay of what, 0.2, 0.3 with 2%, but it's adding just a little bit of glitter to it. And it's all these small things you do, guys, that will add up to make your productions a lot better. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of 2 cents on reverb. Last thing I want to talk about here, actually, I forgot to note that decay and room size, sometimes they're basically correlated. They are the same thing, but you do also want to play around with them. Room size, decay, the terminology and the way the reverbs explain things are different, but you just have to work with it. I don't want to leave you guys hanging with maybe some questions. So color, this is going to dictate, is it a bit darker or is it a bit brighter or in between? Diffusion will dictate kind of like the symmetry of the room. I usually use diffusion all the way at the top, because if you reduce the diffusion, it will turn it into like a triangular room where everything's bouncing off. If you increase the diffusion, and you guys will see that better with Fruity Reverb 2. So you guys can see here, when we increase the size, you can see the size there, small size, bigger size. And when you reduce the diffusion, you can see there, this gives me the best explanation. You can see that it's going to bounce a lot. It'll be like instead of ba. Like a realistic reverb is going to definitely have a high diffusion. And of course, the low cut, the high cut, is it going to be darker? Is it going to lose some of that body? But decay and size are correlated. They share a relation to one another. And the last thing I want to say is that if you have a snare drum that maybe you don't want the reverb to affect the initial impact, that's what you're going to use pre-delay for. Pre-delay will make sure that that snare drum plays and the reverb hits after about 30 ms. So if you want to preserve that transient and really not affect it at all, but even then, 2% is not a value to really worry about. You could roll with this. But if you wanted to be so meticulous with it, you could increase the pre-delay, then the snare will hit, and then there's a delay to the reverb. And we can hear that in action like this. We'll put it big. We'll do like this. So there we go now. Have a listen to this. So you can see that's extreme, but that gets the point across. You could do something like, let's just say 30 ms, 2%. Let's see how this sounds. Cool, you know, simple. And what happens when we do this? Again, like, it's a subtle difference because even though we bumped up the room size, the decay is really holding its balls. It's controlling what's going on. So I hope you guys like this. I wanted to share some of my insight and what I've learned over the years about reverb. And if you guys have any questions about reverb and what reverbs I recommend, or, you know, anything, feel free to drop a comment below, because a lot of your suggestions fuel my future video ideas. So I really appreciate it. It means a lot. Make sure you guys are subscribed. We're doing a giveaway at 500 subscribers, and hit that notification bell so you guys are alerted when these hot, fresh donuts come out of that oven. You know what I'm saying? And make sure you guys smash that like button. It means a lot to me. And I will see you guys in the future video. Until then, keep making them gains.